welcome to the Still to Be Determined podcast, the podcast that follows up on topics from the YouTube channel Undecided with Matt Farrell. I am not Matt Farrell, despite all the comments around our new YouTube version of the podcast. This is not a double image you're seeing of Matthew on both sides.
Yes.
As somebody pointed out, it's a little bit like a before and after.
Yes.
Somebody said I was wearing an eighth of a toupee. Which I really, a Toupeight? Was that what, that's what it would be called?
A Toupeight.
A Toupeight.
Yes.
With me is Matt, obviously. For those of you watching on screen, you can see him right there.
Hello.
And just as a reminder, we have a couple of ways to support the podcast. First, of course, you can follow the podcast. You can do that through your podcast provider. You can also do that at YouTube, where you get to see us on the screens. And you can also go to stilltbd.fm, where we have a link right in the middle of that page, which gives you a place where you can support us directly. And we are appreciative of each little piece of support we get, no matter what it is, whether it's liking videos, following us, subscribing. It all helps the channel. This week, we're going to be talking about Matthew's most recent episode, which was, can nanotechnology solve our battery production problem? ? This episode dropped on February 16th, 2021, so it was a belated Happy Valentine's Day to all of his viewers. He loves each and every one of you.
I love you all.
Yes. You can feel the love. And real quickly, just to touch base on Valentine's Day. I don't know if anybody else had a similar experience, but I had a photograph of me and my girlfriend, which was an extra copy. And my girlfriend was clearing out duplicates of things. And she said, "Oh, what are we going to do with this photo? It's a nice photo of us, but we don't really have a use for it." And I said, "I think my parents would like it." Seemed like a good for mom and dad photo. So I went to the drugstore. I got a card. I threw it in the card with a message, "Happy early Valentine's Day." And then I discovered I don't have any stamps. So I started off to the post office and discovered the line at the post office was about 30 people deep.
Yep.
And they have
right.
the automatic self, the vending machines where you can do some of the postage stuff yourself. I went to the little thing. I touched the screens. It went to a holding screen for about 3 minutes. And when it finally popped out, it said, "I can't do anything." It had no stamps. It couldn't even, it apparently didn't have any of the stickers that it needs to print anything.
Uh-huh.
So the only way for me to get stamps would have been to get into line, which, as I said, was 30 people deep. So my card with the picture that had the message of "Happy early Valentine's Day, Mom and Dad," I mailed 2 days ago.
You're going to confuse our parents to no end.
Yeah. And this is how confusing it was to our parents, because I spoke to them on the phone yesterday and I described this whole situation to them. And Mom's response was, "So should we already have that card?" No.
It's
No.
postcard inception.
I mailed a card 2 days ago that will be an early Valentine's Day. It's early for 2022. But on to the nanotechnology questions. One of the main comments on this video that I thought was very funny was people talking about the person you interviewed, talking about his accent.
Yeah.
And his vocal style.
Yeah.
And people were debating, is he a Southern California guy? Is he just a West Coaster? There was definitely a bit of a surfer bro in there, which was,
yes.
I found it very charming. I thought he seemed like a really nice guy.
He's really nice. I like him.
And I loved the kind of the stunned awe that he has about the technology that he had a hand in creating.
Mm-hmm.
And the story that I thought was the most charming was when they very early on realized, "Oh my gosh, we have something here that's really kind of incredible," describing the single sheet and then one single hole that then demonstrated that it could actually capture molecules of one size and let the other ones through, and that suddenly it was being called a miracle technology in the trade mags. And his response was, we only had one sheet and we had one hole. That So
it's something that you see a lot in all this kind of research. Like it was Jeff Dahn his group released a paper talking about how lithium ion batteries, this one chemistry they showed a test for, could theoretically be a 1 million mile battery for EVs. And suddenly there were headlines everywhere about million mile battery achieved. It's going to be Tesla's next battery. It was like, whoa, that's not what this research was about.
Right.
It was about one little tiny part setting a new baseline. It's like the press tends to grab onto the wrong thing, and
right,
run full steam ahead,
right,
which is what he was kind of describing, which I thought was funny.
Right. It is. I also thought it was really neat that he was talking about, and of course, the level at which his research is taking place has got to be a very small world. So the fact that he's talking about this person that he was partnered with in one area has an office literally next door to Dr. Goodenough, who is somebody you've talked about in other videos. Can you talk a little bit about Goodenough and kind of like circle back onto that to demonstrate what that connection is? Goodenough's research revolves around battery technology, correct?
Correct. I mean, he's one of the granddaddies of lithium ion batteries. He was one of the inventors of the technology. And he's actually such a rock star. The thing about him that a lot of people don't know is he invented RAM. Like this guy, like the thing that makes every computer in the world work.
Right.
He invented RAM. It's like this guy he's in his late 80s, early 90s now, and he's still working. And he's spearheading research into basically like silicon and salt based batteries and like things that are going to create batteries that are fully 100% recyclable. It's like he's still making an impact. And he works at the University of Texas, and he has a lab full of, researchers and PhD students that work for him doing this research. And the like it's not insular, but like the tiny world that you're talking about is his research for batteries at University of Texas is like literally right next door to Benny Freeman's group, Benny Freeman, Dr. Benny Freeman is the guy who's kind of like the preeminent membrane researcher in the world. So you have Benny Freeman basically next door to John B. Goodenough, and then you have Monash University in Australia that has some of the leading metal organic framework researchers over there. And it's like everybody knows everybody. It's a very small community. And so once Teague and his group was working on these MOFs, it was like, and they created the connection to Benny Freeman. And then it was like, okay, this could also work on these other technologies. It's like, hey, John, want to help out over here? Right. So it's just like this wonderful, just kind of like little ecosystem of researchers, because it's a very small field. Right. There's a lot of research happening in it, but it's like everybody knows everybody. And so you can start to make these interesting connections where everything kind of loops back onto itself. It's just fascinating. And that actually leads to one of the comments that was in, I don't know if you saw it. Somebody said, I get this a lot of why do you, there's other interesting technologies like this that are happening around the world. Like it's not all about the US.
Right.
And I thought that was a really interesting comment, because it's like, did you not watch the video? Because this is coming mainly out of Australia.
Right.
Like it's like this is a worldwide effort to make what EnergyX is doing is literally a worldwide research effort to make it happen. It's not a US technology. It's a global technology that's being pulled together.
There's the global aspect, and then I also think there's the discrete fields can become so siloed, and that's true of any high level thinking. You end up with a siloing effect, and the more specialized you become in a thing, the fewer people there are in that thing, and so the conversations become very tight knit and a little incestuous, where you end up with a circle of 3 people as opposed to 30 or 300. And I think that's one of the things your channel is trying to do, which is broaden that audience that can be engaged in that conversation and to see these things and make connections. And I've seen that with your commenters who are very, very knowledgeable in a number of different fields, and they can see connections and make suggestions. And one of the things that came up in the comments on this one was something you talked about in the video, which is the idea of merging this technology with projects around desalinization. Or I'm fascinated by the idea that something that is intended on one level to be the mining of a certain mineral could have a byproduct which could be clean water. The overlapping circles of that Venn diagram and the results of what you could get in one plant producing both minerals for one area and clean water for agriculture or even drinking. The fact that the water cleaning process in India requires a removal of fluoride, which from the US perspective, would never occur to me to think that fluoride would be something that you would need to remove from water. But the levels there being so high that it becomes a semi-toxic element affecting bone growth. Not only are the researchers global, but the potential impact could be global, and global in ways that aren't necessarily one-to-one. Here in the US, we would benefit from, battery technology. And in India, drinkable water that's not going to have the same toxicity. Or in areas of Africa, agricultural water for improving farming in certain areas.
Right.
So a myriad of results, all from one little sheet that has a hole in it, to be able to capture a certain mineral. And one of the things that was obvious is that his big picture goal is to have a standalone system that is contained within his company. He's coming to it from a perspective of there are certain processes already in place that they can jump into and become a part of. He talked about the pool system where they have the brine water as it moves from area to area, and different minerals are extracted at different stages. Did you get a sense from him of what he thinks the time frame is, as far as at what point does the pool system move away and it become these contained stations, which are not a brine evaporation station, but an actual his machinery involved completely 100%? Is that a 10-year, a 20-year plan?
Yeah, I asked him questions along those lines, and he never gave me an explicit like time scale. He answered that kind of question in a broader sense, where it was like, it's going to happen, was along the lines of what he was saying. But when it happens is going to be based on demand, because as like the infrastructure that's in place now, these companies are not going to change. They're not going to want to change it because there's too much investment behind it. So it's going to happen, as he pointed out in the section of the video that I did include, which was him saying when they have to start ramping up new production because that S curve is going way up. When they have to make new production is when they're going to be like, we're not going to make more brine pools. We're going to start doing more of this thing over here because it's cost effective, takes less space, it's faster, it's going to save us money. So that at that point is when you'll start to see that S curve going up for demand, is when you'll start to see fewer brine pools being created, less crazy mining happening, and more of this refinement process happening. So he was very vague, but reading between the lines, it sounded like this is going to be a 10 to 20 year transition for that to happen. It's going to be like 2035, 2040, probably, before you start seeing, why are you creating more brine pools? It's like, just do this thing over here. It's going to save you half, it's going to cost half as much, and you'll be able to pump out twice as much.
Right.
So it's going to be along those lines of decades for this to probably play out.
And the overall, you think about the scale of what brine pools, he talked about tens of square miles, and
it's New York City. It's Manhattan.
Yeah.
Manhattan is a brine pool. That's basically what this is.
It was interesting to think about how that could be that could be the tripping point. Not, well, we're not getting enough, but we've run out of land to buy to be able to install these pools. And
Right.
And just the infrastructure involved in actually building that must be a tremendous undertaking for the industry.
The fact it takes 24 months, it takes 6 to 24 months for this process to happen. It's insane to me that it could be, we need some lithium. So you're basically having to plan 2 years ahead of time for this process to happen of, we think demand's going to be here. So we have to like build out some extra brine pools to make sure that we have enough lithium coming out 2 years from now.
And demand is growing exponentially.
Right. So it's like, it's going to make it harder and harder to plan ahead if you're using that kind of method. So it's like this kind of technology is going to make it quicker to respond because you don't have to build out this slow moving evaporation process. It's a clever technology that they're using today because it's just using Mother Nature. It doesn't cost any energy to do it because it's just the sun that's evaporating off the water, where this is going to take energy to do. But the gains that you get out of it are, it's going to be, as he put it to me at one point in our conversation, he basically said, there's going to be a point at which these companies will see the savings that will just be like, okay, no, we're just going to go all in on this. It's going to make it it's not going to be a hard decision for them to make because the cost is going to be so much cheaper to go this route. And once the first company that does that does it, every other company, it's going to be like dominoes going down. Every other company is going to jump on board because they won't be able to compete price wise otherwise.
Right. Two follow-up questions to that. One was, what is the vision for the battery field aside from lithium? Was it Tesla is involved in looking at something that's a non-lithium battery? Was it nickel?
No, they're getting rid of cobalt. They're increasing the amount of nickel in their chemistry, and they're also starting to increase the amount of silicon in their batteries. And silicon is kind of like the holy grail because silicon is so much better at absorbing lithium ions. So it's like there's still gonna be lithium, but silicon as part of the mix is just really amazing.
So it's more efficient.
But it's also, it's like, imagine a sponge that when you fill it with water, it increases in size 4 or 5 times. And then when it releases those lithium ions, it shrinks back down. It grows and shrinks much more than the stuff they're using today. So it can crack and break apart because of this massive expansion and contraction. So it's figuring out ways to not counteract it, but contain it in a way so it doesn't break apart and just fall apart. And Tesla has a method right now.
Or potentially explode. You're building a pressurized battery at that point.
You account for that in the engineering of you have to leave space.
That's terrifying though.
But Tesla has this method of where they're basically putting a coating around little silicon pieces, and it's very promising. And then there's other companies that are looking at using completely different things and different salts and completely like all silicon for most of the battery. It's like there's all these different kind of levels of research trying to get away from the materials we're using today that are harder to mine, too expensive to mine, or they're really not hard, but they don't recycle. That's like what John B. Goodenough is doing, is he's looking at batteries that literally could biodegrade. Like seriously, if you took if he succeeds in what they're doing, there's theoretically a point at which a battery, like when it's done, you don't have to recycle it. You could just like literally chuck it into a compost heap.
It could be composted.
It basically, because it's made from just the organic materials that just kind of from seawater. It's like you're pulling stuff out of seawater to make batteries, and it's crazy, trippy stuff that's probably 20, 30 years away, but that's kind of where things are going.
I hope I live long enough to see the day where I can take my garbage and just go throw it into the ocean.
Back to the sea with you.
You're welcome, Mother Nature. So a couple of other comments that were made on this video. One was, imagine, it was a very brief comment that you kind of had to parse what they were trying to get to, but effectively it seemed like they were saying the speed at which this technology is evolving is far too slow. They said, imagine having to go through this slow growth, either the pool use or even the growth of this technology in particular. Imagine having to go through that for 10 years. H is the only answer. And I assume they meant hydrogen as opposed to heroin. So it seems like there's this almost a horse race between this style of battery technology, people who are pushing for hydrogen or the alternate battery route that you've just been describing. If you were to put your money on one of those horses, which would you put it on?
It would be some kind of battery technology. I don't think hydrogen has a shot in hell right now. It's like the Betamax versus VHS.
Mm.
It's like it had its time where it looked like the most promising solution, but then while it was struggling to come to market, batteries found an alternate path that just has been, there's been so much innovation in batteries, and Tesla proving that it's viable today for EVs. It's like batteries have just outstripped what hydrogen can possibly bring us for consumer transportation. There's still hydrogen fuel cells and things like that still have a lot of possibility for other things. So it's not going to go away, but I think it's going to be more of a niche player. Batteries is where it's at. Within batteries, there's kind of a raging debate about like, well, solid state's going to come in and clean house because solid state batteries are where the future's at. I don't necessarily disagree with that. I just don't think it's going to be as earth shattering as some people think. So it's like there are solid state battery companies like QuantumScape. I'm blanking on a couple of the other ones, but there's some solid state battery companies that I think have a real shot at making a real dent, because solid state batteries are very safe. They don't explode. They're just safe, energy dense. So it's kind of like the win-win, where today you might have 1 ton of batteries in your car. It's like with a solid state, it could be, half a ton, and you get the same range, and it's not going to blow up on you. It's like there's so many benefits to it. That's kind of where things are heading. When we get there, I have no idea.
Right.
Companies like Toyota claim they have solid state batteries that are going to be coming out by like 2024. But when you read into the press releases, it's like, yeah, we're going to show you some cars that are working with solid state batteries in 2024, but they're not going to be available for purchase until 2028. It's like when you read the fine print of what they're bragging about, it's like, it's still a decade away before we start seeing this in a meaningful way.
So it sounds like the debate around these batteries is highly charged.
Okay. I see. Yeah. I like the way that was almost like you just laid that, you had that joke ready to go. You just went to, that was a long walk for that joke.
I just let it flop out on the table, and we just both stared at it. I'll just wrap this conversation up with, I think it was an appropriate comment from one of your viewers who said, this is alchemy for the 21st century. It really does enter the level of, we think about alchemists and have this vision of them as the crazy mad scientists who didn't actually have science to back them up. And their visions of turning lead into gold. And maybe we're looking at history in the wrong way. Maybe there was a piece of them was like, oh, I'm not turning lead into gold. You just don't understand it. My message is getting watered down for the layman, and you really don't understand what I'm doing here. Mm-hmm. It feels like that's where we are right now. There's these visions from these people who know so much about the width of a human hair. And they're saying, I can use that information in order to create electricity that you can use in your car. And so I just wanted to end with this is alchemy for the 21st century. People like me are clinging to people like you who know a little bit more about what's going on.
Well, it's what's the saying? It's like science that's advanced enough appears to be magic.
Yeah.
What was it? It's like that's kind of what's going on right now, where some of this stuff is so advanced and on the verge of what feels like science fiction, but we are actually making it happen. That to the layman's, and I lump myself into that group because I am not an expert in this stuff. It's there's some voodoo going on here of like, I don't completely understand what you're doing, but wow, that's really cool. And so we're at the beginning of a new industrial revolution that's happening with everything from nanotechnology to battery technology to renewable energy. we haven't seen something this dramatic since the Industrial Revolution, the early 1900s. It's
Right.
like, this is not something that happens in everybody's lifetime, and we're experiencing it right now. And it's kind of weird to try to be like, get perspective. This is what I'm always trying to do in my videos, trying to give perspective of like, take a step back and just be in awe of what's happening right now
Right.
and where this is going, because it's going to be crazy times. Like
This is
fast forward 30 years,
yeah.
it's going to be crazy.
we're the people at the World Fair seeing a Tesla demonstration.
Yes.
We're the people at the World's Fair seeing a steam engine pull as much weight as 100 ox would have to be used to pull that same amount of weight.
Exactly.
And it's kind of stupendous, but it's hard for us to know how to wrap our heads around it. And you mentioned science fiction as a writer, and a writer of some science fiction. In my experience, these advances in technology are really blurring the line between what is considered realist mainstream fiction and science fiction. There's a blurring of those lines where if you're writing about the world we currently live in, you're writing what 30 years ago would have been science fiction. People with a computer in their pocket. And one of my favorite stories by William Gibson, he coined many terms that have become just part and parlance of the way we describe the world and the way we describe the internet. And he had a short story which was about a man who was losing his connection to the world in front of him and getting flashes of a retrofuturism that was popping in. And the retrofuturism he was getting was a kind of 1950s pop sci-fi vision. But the point of the story is that retro future that he didn't have was in effect there. He was just not recognizing it as being there. So a vision where you had flying cities, and he's driving a friend to the airport and is watching a 767 take off. And just the sheer number of people in that airplane. And we don't think of that as a flying city, but effectively you get into a plane and you're traveling at 600 miles an hour and you're watching TV on the back of the seat and the person in front of you. And
it's
we
amazing.
no longer think of flight as something bizarre or unreal. And the thing that stood out for me was he's driving along and there's this flash of people eating food pills. Like they don't eat anymore. They take food pills in order to sustain themselves. And what this guy is doing in order to suppress his appetite is taking diet pills. And effectively, it's the same thing from the opposite direction. It's like he's not getting nutrition. He's suppressing it. But he, in effect, is walking along saying, I'm hungry. I don't want to be hungry, so I'll take this.
Yep.
So I feel like that's where we are right now. This channel, your channel, we're talking about things that seem like magic. But it's quite mind-blowing if you take a moment and really take a look at it. As usual, transitioning to the second half of our show, wanted to talk about some TV shows or movies that we've been watching, and I have a coin. I'm about to flip it. It's in the air, Matt. Call it.
Tails. What I love is this is now on YouTube, so you can see this.
It's heads. So I get to go first.
All right.
Two things to talk about. One is, as people who've been listening regularly know, I've been watching the filmography of Polly Platt, who was a filmmaker who was lost in the shadows of her first husband, who was Peter Bogdanovich. But she was involved in the industry for decades and had a hand in making some of the most memorable movies of the era. And the most recent movie that we've watched from her filmography is Steve Martin's The Man with Two Brains. This is a movie that I used to watch in high school with my best friend. We probably watched it, I'm going to just guess 20 times. It's directed by Carl Reiner, and it also stars Kathleen Turner, who is brilliant as a femme fatale in a story about a brain scientist whose brilliance is second only to his ego. And it is, if you haven't seen it, it is a combination of comedy styles that includes some visual gags, slapstick, and airplane style pun humor. It has one of my favorite recurring jokes is every time they're in an operating room, Steve Martin is calling out for various tools and implements, and the camera is very close on his face as he's looking at the person he's operating on. He's like, scalpel, scissors, wipe my brow. And then you will hear a cat in the background and he'll yell, get that cat out of here. So it's that style of Steve Martin. There is literally a scene where he's wearing OR scrubs and walking down the hallway and is also wearing rabbit ears, which of course was part of his style of comedy at that time when he was doing arena. He was one of the first arena comedians. And so he kind of had to create a comedy style that was big enough to fill an arena, like a basketball stadium. He couldn't just do, observational humor. So he invented a showy type of thing with dancing and banjos and arrows through your head. And so it's that Steve Martin. It's not the father of the bride, Steve Martin, of 15 years later. Right. But it's a fun movie. And if you're looking for something that is just a lot of belly laughs without any kind of deeper things that you have to dig for, it's a great movie for that. So I recommend it. The other thing I wanted to talk about was 2 bits of news from the Star Wars universe, which got my Star Wars nerd juices flowing, which I know is a phrase that most people probably did not want to hear when they tuned into this podcast. The first is a trailer was released for a new animated series in the Star Wars universe, which is The Bad Batch. And The Bad Batch is a group of clone troopers who were introduced in the most recent and final season of the Clone Wars series. It was very obvious to me as we were watching that this was a secret pilot that they were putting together to see what fan response would be. And the Bad Batch is an interesting concept in that it is a group of clone troopers for whom the development process, the growth process, didn't work out properly. So each of them has a number of traits that set them apart from what a standard clone trooper would be. And they work together. And as a result, they've been turned into effectively an elite commando unit. And the promise of the series looks like it'll be really fantastic in that as the Republic transitions into the Empire and Palpatine now has full control, I get the impression that potentially as a result of the bad growth of these clones,
they don't turn.
Order 66 does not work for them, and they don't turn, and they become mercenaries. And I think that for me, one of the things I'm hoping to see come out of this are storylines where they would be running in parallel to what is going on with Vader and the growth of the Empire and the pursuit of the remaining Jedi. I think that the stories there could be really fantastic, and I'm very excited about that. The other bit of Star Wars news I wanted to talk about was, this will be a spoiler for people. If you're not interested, please jump forward by, let's say, a solid 60 seconds. I don't know the name of the actor, but I have heard rumors that they have settled in on an actor to star as Ezra from the series Rebels in the soon to be produced show around Ahsoka Tano. And I'm very excited about that.
That got me excited too. Yeah.
He's a great character. I loved Rebels. I loved the storyline of Rebels, and everything that they've teased with her character in appearing in The Mandalorian really broadcast the idea that Ezra would be returning because of the villain that she appears to be pursuing. Yeah. So I'm very excited about what that could mean for the storytelling around that show and that character in particular, who was a character that I really wanted to see more of. So I'm excited about both of those things.
Yeah, I'm excited for The Bad Batch too. When it was in that season, while I liked it, I did not like that they put it into the final season, because it was like a right turn in the storyline. I was like, why am I watching a couple episodes of these guys? This is like out of nowhere. This is weird. And it was clear that they were trying to set up a spinoff, and that irritated me. But I did like them, and I love the idea that they're going to be they're already outcasts, but you know that they're going to become even more of an outcast, like you said, becoming mercenaries, because they probably don't turn
Yeah.
when the switch is flipped, they don't switch. So it's going to be really interesting to see. There's so much cool storylines that come out of that. So I'm very excited too. And there's another piece of Star Wars news that kind of came out in a little drip. Ryan Johnson, who's one of my favorite filmmakers today. If you've ever like Knives Out, he did the second new Star Wars film. Was
Brick.
it Brick?
Yeah. One of the best movies I've ever seen.
He is one of the smartest filmmakers making movies, and he's like in my head. I love that style of sci-fi fantasy kind of stuff that he does. He was supposedly, after he finished his Star Wars movie, given basically kind of a green light to make a new trilogy that has nothing to do with Skywalker. It's like, go make yourself a new Star Wars trilogy. And then after all the backlash started to happen around his film, and J.J. Abrams came in and tried to basically retcon everything he had done in his movie, and it just turned into this big spat. It was kind of like clear that his trilogy was gone. News kind of trickled out that it's not. That evidently it still is in some form of process right now, where there's still, it's potentially still going to happen. And hearing that made me so excited, because I want to see what he can come up with brand new in the Star Wars universe that has nothing to do with the Skywalker stuff. Set up a whole new trilogy from one writer, so that it's a cohesive thing, where the latest 3 movies were a hot mess because they didn't plan it all out in advance. This, I cannot wait. I hope it really comes through. So to me, that was the Star Wars news that I was the most excited about.
Yeah, his involvement as a storyteller is really promising, and I agree with you. And Knives Out was born of the criticism of his Star Wars film. Mm-hmm. He wrote it in response to the fact that the fans came out with Knives Out, and that there was no telling a story in that pre-existing universe was full of landmines. And I disagreed with a lot of the criticism.
Yep, I did too.
It was unfair. And my thing is, Star Wars should be for different audiences, and there are different ways to tell different stories for different audiences. And those movies, technically, they were not for you and me; they were for children. And I thought that was fine. I thought it was fine that they were telling stories for a different audience, for whom Luke Skywalker would be an old man.
Yep,
like I was cool with that. So him doing his own thing, and I think that one of the things that's being proved by all the different stories that are coming out of the Star Wars universe right now, it has no borders. It can go lots of different places, and you can tell very, very small stories, and you can tell very, very big stories. And I think that it's exciting to see how different creators are bringing their vision of storytelling to different things at different scales. And there's a lot of room for everybody.
The one thing I was going to bring up was this actually comes from a Mommy Farrell recommendation. She last time I talked to her, she recommended this movie that's on Hulu here in the United States. You can rent it elsewhere. It's a Russian film called Sputnik. She loved it. And when you look it up online, if you look on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a really good Rotten Tomato rating. And if you look it up on IMDb, it's got a middling recommendation. It's kind of weird how it's like all over the map. I watched it. If you enjoy science fiction movies like alien horror films, it's definitely worth a watch. It's when she told me about it, it was funny. She was like, it's subtitled. She said, so you got to read the subtitles, but there's not that much talking in it. It's not a big deal. After watching it, I was like, Mom, what movie did you watch? It was like nonstop talking for the first half of the film, where it was just nonstop subtitles. And then the second half of the film, where I will just say stuff is really starting to happen. That's all I'll say, is there's far less talking and there's more things to watch. So there's less talking in the second half. So I think that's what she was remembering when she was talking about it. But it's the basic
also keep
plot.
in mind that she is a person who has subtitles on most of the time.
Yes.
So she's used to reading probably every show and movie all the way through. So for her,
Yeah.
an hour of less is probably like, oh, there's barely any. So
Yeah. So the basic plot of this movie, without giving anything away, it takes place, I think, in the 80s when the USSR was still a thing, and two cosmonauts in space are disconnecting from their space station and about to return to Earth. And when they disconnect and on their re-entry, something hits their capsule, and then you can hear something on the outside of the capsule. And the last shot you see, this is right at the beginning, is like the inside of the hatch thing starting to turn. And I was like, what? And the next time you see them, the capsule has crashed somewhere in Russia where it's probably not supposed to be. And these two cosmonauts are outside of the capsule and hijinks ensue.
mhm.
Um, it's a really innovative take on the alien genre because it's very like much like Alien, um, where there's this one thing that came back to Earth with them, but it twists it in a way I've never seen in a science fiction movie like this before, where it's not just, oh, this big boogie monster.
Mhm.
It's a very unique way that it's a very intelligent thing, and the way it interacts with the other characters is unique. And it's not like a jump out of the dark, scare ya kind of film. It's just this foreboding mystery box kind of unfolding as to what it is, what it means, and who's the big enemy, who's the big evil thing in the film. It's not what you think it is, and it twists a couple of times in the film before the end. And I wouldn't say it was like I was completely like Sixth Sense. I didn't see that coming. I could see where it was coming just before it was going to happen, but it
Mhm.
was enough of a mystery box. It kept me interested throughout. So I would kind of give it a mild recommendation. I didn't think it was as great as our mother thought it was, but I thought it was definitely worth watching. I was entertained. And the thing about it that I really took away from it was the director. His name is Igor uh, Abramenko. I think that's how you say his last name. I think this guy's got a huge future. Like he's got a this is his first, it looks like it's his first full film, and it's based on a short film that he did
Mm.
that was called The Passenger. So it looks like he made a short film about these two cosmonauts bringing something back to Earth. And then it probably got a lot of attention, and they funded a full film that turned into Sputnik. He's got this. There was like hints of Ridley Scott in his filmmaking style, and there was hints of a little bit of a David Fincher kind of aspect, because David Fincher is all about like very mechanical movements in all of his stuff, and like interesting wide shots. And there were some elements of that in there. So it's like I could definitely see that there's some major filmmakers that have influenced his style, but he is his own. So he didn't look like he was just mimicking. He looked like he was creating something of his own. And it's like he is like the last time I felt like this about a filmmaker was honestly it was David Fincher. Like when I saw Seven, I was just like blown away. Like this guy is going to be huge. Actually, it was Alien 3, even though that was a horrible movie. That blew me away with the style.
Yeah.
So when Seven came out, it was like I had to go see it immediately because I knew this guy was going to be big. I feel this way about this guy. It's like I don't know if he'll become a worldwide success, because I don't know of many Russian filmmakers that have really had success going worldwide. But this guy, he seems like he's got a future ahead of him. So it'd be interesting to watch this film with an eye to the fact that you might see more from him coming in the future. So definitely check it out.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that I'm most excited about with HBO Max and Netflix and Hulu and all these streaming channels. One of the things that they're doing is they're making access to some of these foreign films and TV series
Yeah.
so much easier.
Yes.
And the brilliant storytelling that has always existed in these other parts of the world is finally coming to us. You've mentioned 30 Coins recently.
Lupin.
Lupin, which I just started watching, and after the first episode, I was like, this is a beautiful, like, sort of James Bond style
Yeah.
of telling a heist movie.
Yeah.
And that marriage of the James Bond style with a heist story is super sleek. And the lead actor in it, I'm just
He's great. I love him.
I'm like, this guy, I would watch him do anything. He just
Yeah.
has so much charisma in the quiet moments where he's There's a scene in an auction where he's sitting in the auction. He's just kind of smiling. And I'm just like, this guy's cooler than cool. He's
I want to be this
perfect.
guy.
I want to be this guy. And the ability to have access to these things is very exciting. So that's a movie that I do have on my radar. And like you, I heard about it from Mama Farrell. So there's another recommendation that I need to catch up on. So if anybody out there has checked out that movie or has a thought about the Star Wars universe, some people are exhausted by the growth of the Star Wars universe. I say that as somebody who lives with one of those people who is exhausted by it. My girlfriend is of the mind that
peak Star Wars.
maybe there's a little too much of all this stuff. I am not in that camp,
No,
but
I'm not either.
if any of our listeners are, let us know why. Let us know what you think about that. You can find the contact information. Let me start that sentence over again. Wow. One of the benefits of watching this on YouTube is you get to see these glitches. You can find our contact information in the podcast description. You can also see it on the description in the YouTube page for this video. Please do subscribe. You can subscribe to us through your favorite podcast provider, or you can do it through YouTube, where you get to see our faces. And in case anybody's confused about which one of us is which, Matthew is in the room that is a dedicated film and podcast studio.
Yep.
And I am the guy who has a paper bag taped to the window behind me to cut back on the glare. You can also directly support the podcast. You can visit stilltbd.fm. There's a support the podcast link right in the middle of that page. You can support us with as little as $1, and every bit of support, whether it's through subscription, likes, or throwing a buck in the tip jar, all of it is helpful, and we appreciate all of it. Please be sure to give us a rating, review, and share us with your friends. It really does help the podcast. The podcast helps the channel. The channel helps Matthew. And then I have to find the Scotch tape to tape the paper bag to my window. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. We'll talk to you next time.